My name, my name is Eric Gondree, and I'm a part-time teacher at Nufs, and I am doing a presentation called "The Five C's of Historical Thinking." Normally, I mean, in an in-person seminar, I would be able to take the participants and actually run through some of these exercises, which would take a lot more time. So I'm gonna, due to time constraints, I'm just going to describe some of the activities, right? So I want to just basically, I like to teach content courses in English. And this is about five concepts called the five C's, which are at the core of teaching historical narratives, historical things. And I'll give sample exercises for each of them. As for myself, I had taught social studies for a while in public schools in upstate New York, and I'm also currently doing a U.S. History and Culture elective at Nufs. If you're interested in having a look at my book, you can look at the QR code. A copy of this PowerPoint show will be available for download, and I'll provide the QR code for that at the end if you'd like to download your own copy of this. Normally, I would have people discuss the question of what is history. Um, Perhaps if anyone here would like to throw out an idea, would anyone who is participating like to offer a suggestion? What is history? Taylor?
The Diary of a Madman. I don't know if you like that quote, but
Diary of a Madman. Well, that there is storytelling, right? I know the definition really requires some thought. This is one of those words that we use all the time, and the definition, when you stop to think about it, is pretty tough. But I'm going to suggest a definition, and I really like this one because it really encapsulates everything. So the bodies of knowledge about the past produced by historians together with everything involved in the production, communication of, and teaching about that knowledge. It's from Arthur Marwick, who's a British historian. And so, really, it covers everything. And it's not just what we know, but how we know it and how we teach and communicate it. And how we know it is really interdisciplinary. It comes from archaeology, the sciences, and so on. Right. Now, the five C's of historical thinking comes from an article written by a couple of Canadian history teachers in 2007, teaching historical thinking. And the five C's are five concepts that stand at the heart of questions historians seek to answer, the arguments we make, and the debates in which we engage. And I want to give examples of how you can use these in your own classes. And the five C's are change, context, causality, contingency, and complexity. And I'm going to have to, speed through a little bit of each of these. So change, simply put, is how has the world changed? And also, how has it not changed? So continuity is in there also. So the pictures here, if both of the pictures were in black and white, you really couldn't tell what year they were taken in because this festival hasn't changed that much over the years, right? Holidays really, maybe they have changed in some ways, maybe they haven't, right? So to show a change in history, there are activities that can help illustrate historical change. And so one way, for example, you could assign students with interviewing grandparents or interviewing older neighbors, right? What do they think? How has things changed in their lives over time? Or maybe you could take old newspapers or old photographs and compare them with today's news or today's photographs, right? So these are ideas of how history can change, how society can change, or how it can stay the same. In language teaching, language changes over time. So, for example, when we say that software or a new piece of technology has a problem, we say it's got a bug in it, software bug, and debugging is the process of removing these kinds of problems. Well, the origin of this kind of goes back to, supposedly goes back to the 1940s when computers were big enough to walk into. And so the joke that developed was that, oh, a bug got into the machine and caused a problem, right? So that's bugging. If you're going to study kanji or Chinese, it's often a good idea. It's very, very helpful to know the origin of the kanji so that you can get an idea and help to remember the meaning of it, right? So, for example, older sister in Chinese came from a picture of a woman kneeling by an ancestral tablet. Uh, but you have to be careful with your examples because you might confuse students. So, for example, one of the more esoteric examples of is the Chinese word bang, which is like to assist, to help, or a criminal gang. And it came from an image of a hand with mud sealing up the side of a shoe with cotton thread. And I wasn't really sure how that related, but I also found out later on that it also means the side of a shoe in the right context. So I guess that's still there. Yeah, another example, how has language changed over time? There's a historic character being shown here, a couple of, three images made in different times and different methods. Ivan the Fourth, called Tsarevil the Rus, also known in English as Ivan the Terrible, right? And when you kind of think about this, well, in Russian, Ivan Grozny, Grozny means like awe-inspiring or formidable. And this is kind of a mistranslation, Ivan the Terrible. So, for example, he was an ally of England. So why would the English call their ally terrible? During this time, for example, England established its first embassy in Moscow. Its first like diplomatic uh, house in Moscow. And there's also a corporation for foreign trade was set up for the fur trade, the Muscovy Company, right? So England had an ally in Ivan the Terrible. So it's a strange name for an ally. But you find out that it's actually a mistranslation from Elizabethan English to modern English. That if you look at the King James Bible, which was written a couple of decades after this period, there's a line in one of the Psalms that says, "O God, thou art terrible." And if you look at how the modern translation in the International Bible, the same line is, oh God, you are awesome, right? So really it's Ivan the Awesome and not Ivan the Terrible, right? So this is kind of a change in English itself, right? That's an example of historic change. Next C is context. Stories need context in order to be understandable. So here we have a picture of a bell. The bell is a church bell, is on display. What does it mean? Well, it's hard to tell on its own. This is a historical painting, and there's some kind of drama going on in the painting. And again, without knowing the context, you're going to be at a loss to know what the story is. So if you ever watch the movie, all the Star Wars movies in the beginning have like the scrolling, the words scrolling by, that gives you the context, right? So here's the context. This is a painting made in the 1800s, trying to show a dramatic point in Russian history. The painting is called Ivan the Terrible Kills His Son. And there was Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan the Fifth were having a really screaming argument, and Ivan the Terrible loses his temper, hits his son on the head with an iron-tipped staff, and accidentally kills him. So this shows this really dramatic moment. And this created a succession dispute because the next son in line, Fyodor, was considered unfit for the throne. He was described as having like the mind of a child, right? Couldn't take it. And the son after that was too young. Actual power was in the hands of the regent, Boris Godunov. So Dmitri, who was supposedly in line for the throne, one day he turned up dead outside of a vacation home. And there was this is really is a murder mystery, right? The official investigation said that the boy was playing with a knife. He was playing a game, throwing a knife, and had a seizure and stabbed himself. And Dimitri's mother didn't believe this at all, believed that the son was murdered. At any rate, on the site of Dimitri's death, a church was later built. And inside the church, it's called Church of St. Dimitri on the Blood. Inside the church, there is this bell on display, and this is called the Exiled Bell. And the story is that after the death of Dimitri, this church bell began to ring on its own, is the story. And this set off a riot in the town of Uglitch, and the bell was blamed for the riot. And so the bell got punished for the riot. It got whipped, sent off to Siberia, and locked in a cell. In 1892, it got a official pardon and was returned, right? So anyway, so now you can kind of see the context behind these pictures and why the bell is on display. There is a reason that they're both related. So in your own classes, there are activities that you can use to teach context, what's happening. You show a historical image, show some historical artwork, have students try to figure out what's going on. And there's many, many examples of this that you can show. So, for example, this is a picture from a rare book from Mexico in the 1400s. It's a Mixtec book. And if you show images, um, there's information encoded in the book. So you can give students a reproduction of part of this Mixtec book and have them find the information, right? And so this is like an activity, and there's a code to it. And once they figure out the code, they can find the information. So you can find the name of the character, Lord Eight Deer, the year and the day, as well as the Lady 13 Serpent, and so forth. And here's actually a picture of Lord Eight Deer, right? So you can have them try to find details and try to find the information and kind of get an idea of a completely foreign culture here. Another example of historic artwork that you can use. This is from a new Assyrian palace, and it shows like a sequence of events. And this is called the Lion Hunt of Ashurbanipal. It's on display in the British Museum. And one of the panels shows King Ashurbanipal of Assyria stabbing a lion through the heart with a sword. And so you can ask students, did it really happen that way? Because that's pretty cool, right? Or is it just, is it made up to make them look really cool? And so, did it really happen like that? So you can have a discussion, and then you can show them the larger context that the lion was kept in a cage and released. So, okay, maybe that makes a bit more sense. So you can have a discussion. Do you think this is realistic or not, and why? Another example of a context activity. Normally, I would give a practice run through of the people here, so I'll just have to go through it really quickly. It shows another panel showing the Battle of Ulai, which is between the Neo-Assyrians and the Elamites, who were a people in southwestern Iran. And you show them a printout of this detailed image and give them a couple of things to find, right? And I'll just give you a quick introduction. So with your partners, find the following, and I'll show you in turn where they are. So Elamite soldiers being forced off a hill. You can kind of make out the hill, which exists right there. Surrendering Elamite being hit by arrows. There, you got to hunt for it. A collection of Elamite heads right up there, and Elamite prisoners being forced to grind their bones of their ancestors into flour is right at the top here. And you can show this is a flour grinding implement. And you ask the question, which side is better armed? And if they look around, they might see more heavy infantry on the Assyrian side. And yeah, the Assyrians indeed have iron-tipped weapons. And so then you kind of, ask questions like, all right, what's going to happen next? Who's going to win? What do you think? And probably the Elamites are not going to win since they're doing so badly. And you show them the next panel where the Elamites are being forced into a river and give them a quote that's written down where the king of the Assyrians is bragging about damming up the river, right, with Elamite soldiers. So yeah, who's going to win? You can get a sense what's going to happen. Right. So you can have possible discussions. Is this art? Is this propaganda? Who was the audience? How should they feel? Should they feel impressed? Should they feel intimidated? Right. And so on. So that's context. Next one is causality, factors which cause changes or result from changes. That one cause can have multiple effects. One effect can have multiple causes, right? And some factors may outweigh others. And this is kind of challenging. So, for example, if you ask people what was the cause of World War I, most people will answer the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But if you look at the bigger context, a lot more is going on than just him, right? And so when you look at the bigger context, you start to wonder, was Franz Ferdinand really so important, right? So you can have students argue about causality, what was really important. And one example of a causality activity is to look at studies surrounding Otzi the Iceman, who is this frozen a man found in the ice up in the Alps in the early 1990s, nicknamed Otzi. And he has been studied extensively. He was found with his clothing and his tools and so forth. So you can show some information of discoveries and kind of ask, to make certain conclusions about his life. Just to give you some examples, some of the evidence suggested that he was a skilled repairer of his tools. He had, a number of wounds and injuries. His blood work suggested that he lived near a place that copper work was being done, and so forth. And so some scholars have pieced together what they think is the last day and a half of his life. And so you can ask students, do you think this is a realistic timeline based on the evidence? Why not? So this, get him talking, get him to think critically about causality. Or if that's too difficult, you can get them to make a decision located in the past. So give them a situation. Someone in the past is writing a letter or a diary or making a decision. What kind of decision would they make? Think of three reasons. Think what would be the outcomes of this decision, right? So this is a more of a simple causality activity you can have students do. Next, C is contingency. Contingency is how past events are interconnected, how past events require previous conditions, and what were the past decisions that were made. And things may have turned out differently, right? So one famous example from Chinese history were the voyages of the Admiral Zheng He, who went out on voyages of trade and exploration and diplomacy. These were stopped for political reasons. Well, what happens if they hadn't stopped? Would China have become a dominant maritime power in the modern day? That's one possible, what if kind of exercise. Um, some of the first verified Europeans to visit North America were Norse out of Iceland and Greenland. And it was not a real serious attempt to explore North America. It was probably, you can debate why maybe, but what would have been the results if this had been more sustained? Well, maybe today's Canadians might be speaking Icelandic instead of English and Quebecois, perhaps. So you can have a fun discussion like that. What could have happened? So have people write about alternative scenarios or future history, and they have to justify using evidence being realistic, or maybe ask the question of why didn't something happen? Yeah, so that's a contingency exercise. And complexity is the idea that historic phenomena can involve multiple components, and different people may have very different perspectives on the same thing. And you should be careful of oversimplification. It can be very complex. Because teaching complexity, you run the risk of erasing a lot of details. So this is sort of a danger to keep in mind. But so one example of an oversimplification, in English, we say the fall of Rome. Well, it sounds like it's a one-time fast thing. Rome falls and it breaks. Um, and usually when you say the fall of Rome, people think it means Rome falling to invaders. Okay, well, which invaders? There were multiple waves of invaders over a couple of decades, right? Um, and are we talking about Eastern Rome or Western Rome? We're talking about Western Rome, say the fall of Rome. Eastern Roman Empire became Byzantium and lasted several centuries more until the 1400s. So which Rome are we talking about when you say the fall of Rome? And there was a lot of factors. There's environmental factors, there's external, internal factors. You have factors beyond the control of the Romans. So there was the Little Ice Age, crop failures, right? And then, of course, there were internal decisions. There were political crises, all kinds of internal divisions, and so forth. So it's really there's a theory that complexity, as a society becomes more complex, the costs of that outweigh the benefits eventually, and that makes the society vulnerable to collapse, right? So complexity, yeah, instead of saying the fall of Rome, it might be more accurate to say the dissolution of Western Rome, but that's kind of a mouthful to say, right? Anyway, So to put it all together, I want to give an activity that puts it all together, that combines change, context, causality, contingency, and complexity into one thing. And I wanted to kind of share a possible activity to look at. And so in US history, there's a incident in the 1700s called the Boston Massacre. And the most famous drawing of the Boston Massacre is on the screen. It's done by Paul Revere. And the picture is called The Bloody Massacre in King Street. And well, the image, well, first of all, was a plagiarized image. There was another image maker called Henry Pelham who made it the month before, and Paul Revere saw a picture of it and copied it and started selling it about a week or two before Henry Pelham did. Henry Pelham wrote a series of very angry letters about it, right? But it gives us a basis for comparison also. All right, so Boston Massacre, was it really a massacre? In English, the word massacre comes from the Latin word for a butcher shop to indicate really, it's a bloody thing, right? And if you look at other historic massacres in Europe and France, there was the St. Bartholomew Day massacre. Thousands of French Protestants were killed. Uh, India was the Amritsar massacre. Hundreds, perhaps well over 1,000 people were killed. In the case of the Boston Massacre, it's 5 people killed. So it's kind of a small massacre, but that's what it's called. So when you start to look at the image, uh, you got to kind of think critically about it. So, for example, it's not snowing. And in the Boston Massacre, in reality, it was snowing when it happened. So that's a detail that's left out. And one of the details that is most clear is that the crowd is peaceful and unarmed in this. But there's a trial that was done. Some of the British soldiers were put on trial, and according to the transcript of the trial, the crowd was actually riotous and was throwing things. They had clubs, and were they throwing stones or were they throwing snowballs? So it wasn't really a peaceful crowd that was being fired on. And there's a couple of details that are put in here that were inserted. So when you compare it with the original, right? In the original, these details are not in it. So he's sticking in extra things. He's made up some stuff. So Butcher's Hall, that's editorializing. He put a musket in there probably for conspiracy theory reasons. So there's differences from the original. And then also the clothes of the victims suggest that they're wealthier than they are. They're wearing like middle class clothes, but if you look at the list of the actual dead in the newspapers, these were dock workers and rope makers. So it was, very different. And one of the people here who is shown was of a different race, and this is kind of not really emphasized in the picture. And so in later pictures, you can find is a racially mixed crowd armed with clubs, right? So anyway, you can ask the question of students, is this news or is this propaganda? Is he a journalist or is he giving what is today called fake news? And so this kind of offers a example activity where you put it all together. So there are 5 questions to ask. When and why was the document written? Whose viewpoint does it show? Is it believable? Is it confirmed by other sources? How is it supposed to make you feel? And once you start to ask these questions, you can start off having real activities involving the 5 C's. It's not just who, what, and when, but also how, why, what if, and why not. Uh, I think we're just about out of time, so I'd like to show, if you'd like a copy of this, a PowerPoint, you can get your phone up and take a picture of the QR code, and it'll lead you to my webpage, and you can download a copy of it from there. I'd like to open the floor to any questions. I know I went through it really quickly, but there was a lot to get through. So I'd welcome any questions, any comments.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So if you have any questions, please ask now. We don't really have much time.
I'm just curious what kind of reactions you get from students. Is there anything recently that comes to mind?
I'll tell you, I've actually I've done these myself, right? I've done these myself, and I think that they have very good results. So, for
Mhm.
example, students like manga. They like pictures. There's a lot
Yeah.
you can get from a picture. So, I would say that by the time you do, say like the one showing the Battle of Ulai, right? They get
Mhm.
an idea. Wow, these Assyrians were really fearsome, you know. Right. So
Yeah.
I would say that some of these have been pretty effective, and I wouldn't recommend them if I hadn't done them myself.
Mhm.
Right. So I like to use these and reuse them, and you can insert your own stuff. Right.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say that they tend to get it by the end.
Great.
Yeah, I'm really big on presenting practical activities that can help teachers make, making a difference on Monday, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, if there's no more questions, I can say that you are free to download a copy of this off of the website, and you can see